Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on how you can use your presentation skills to move your listeners to take action. And that's important whether you are speaking to a group, if you're up on stage, you're in a meeting, or if you're just on a one-on-one conversation. And for this, I'm particularly happy to have Dana Pharant today as my guest. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too. Before I get started, I'd like to remind you that if you're interested in seeing how your presentation skills are, you can go to our quiz at www.speakforresultsquiz.com. You'll be listening to this on a recording, so you could actually stop right now and go take a look. Speakforresultsquiz.com. It takes 4 minutes, and you can see where you are really rocking your presentation skills and where you might need a little bit of support. Dana Pharant, I'm really happy to be talking to her today. I've been hearing about her through a mutual friend, Cindy Ashton, who has also been on this podcast. She was one of the very first people I interviewed, actually. And Cindy kept saying, you need to meet Dana, you need to meet Dana. And so we have reconnected recently. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Cindy is such a delight. She's like one of my biggest, I think she's my biggest raving fan at this point.
Oh, good. That's always good. Well, let me read the official bio, which is becoming a badass in life and business requires you to stand in your power and be super comfy with being unique. Dana Pharant knows all about standing out and being unique. Her personal brand of the inner dominatrix pushes people out of their comfort zone, challenges their preconceived notions, and has them stepping into a fierce determination to rock their bold, sexy, fun-filled lives. She's worked with clients to transform their lives for 25 plus years. She's been a CEO of $1 million company, 2-time award-winning speaker, best-selling author of 5 books, and earned the title of Master Healer. And yes, she really was a dominatrix. So Dana, I'm thrilled to have you here. Before we get into the dominatrix stuff, and I do have to tell you that before I spoke with my other half this morning, and I said, I'm interviewing a dominatrix. And don't get too excited. I said, no, it's fine. It's fine. Unless we're going to do it on Zoom, I think we're going to keep this PG, but this is not too difficult. But I'd like to know about your dream interview. If you could share the stage with somebody from history, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who ought to be in the audience?
I think one of the things, like every time somebody's asked this type of question, the first person that always jumps up for me is Madonna. So, growing up, Madonna was like my idol. Of course, she was, big at that era in through the 80s. She was a huge pop star. And the more I've come to know her story and watch her journey and her constantly reinventing herself and going through, all those variations and leading into different challenges, I just think she is really a super badass. I love her chutzpah. I love how she just keeps showing up in spite of what people throw at her. And so for me, it would be, an audience of women entrepreneurs who really need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly so that they know that they have just as much right to be up on a stage or going for whatever dream it is that they have as Madonna or I or anybody else, that we are all capable of doing things.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. It's one of the themes when I ask people this. They often say like, okay, so how did you do it? How did you get the courage to get out there and be yourself and really stand up for yourself? So, so I'm delighted to have you here. Madonna would be fun. I would totally be there. So tell me a little bit, what is the inner dominatrix about? And yes, you really were a dominatrix. So might as well get that out of the way first. Tell us about being a dominatrix.
I know it's one of those eye-catching things. It's a real like showstopper, like you're a what? But ultimately, what I need to explain first is that world. Okay, so for most people, we get our information through Hollywood or media unless we are actually involved in it. And so media, and Hollywood in particular, does a terrible job of portraying anybody's profession, least of all this one. And so they show all of the sensational side of it, the whips and the corsets and the stern, persona. And that's just one little slice of what is possibly there. But for me, being a dominatrix, and I'll kind of back it up. So I started out on the submissive side, so, experiencing it myself. And that for me created a really deep transformation for healing a lot of trauma that I had growing up, because we could create a scene that reenacted the abuse, but then we also scripted in a different outcome that allowed me to, really on a deep level, reclaim my power.
So this is kind of a way of practicing new ways of telling your story then.
It is. But it's a very kinesthetic experience because you were immersed in it and you let yourself be, taken care of. You get to surrender to the dominatrix so that they are guiding the scene and really in your best interest. So to me, it's very similar to the coaching world in that, before a dominatrix session, we would sit down and say, okay, well, what's okay? What's not okay? What are your hard limits? What's a never? What's a, ooh, I want to explore this. What do you want to get out of this? Kind of those things, which is very much like coaching. And then, then from there, the scenes are scripted by me. It's loosely scripted because life happens, stuff happens. Yeah. But within the dungeon, once we step into that is now my domain. And I'm in charge. But contrary to what people think, it's not about me being in control of the other person. It's actually about me being super responsible for the other person. I step into this persona of being large and in charge so that they can relax and surrender. And again, if we relate this back to, with coaching, I step in as the expert so that they can relax and we can move through whatever it is we need to move through. And they're not trying to be therapist and patient at the same time. So it's that piece of co-creating that is magical. Now, what I found is that even though it has the ability for this massive transformation, I was surprised that the majority of people really didn't want to go to the dungeon with me. So, so that's what kind of started.
Were they just there to have a little fun or?
Oh yeah, have a little fun. And, some people were quite willing, but for a lot of people where I said, oh, hey, here's this way that we can really move through what's going on. They're like, oh, that's a little too scary. So I started birthing this idea of the inner dominatrix. So the energy of it and inviting people to step into who I had to become to take on that role. And bringing that into the business world, because I really see, and especially for women in business, I'm sure you see this too, women are unfortunately still very apologetic, underprice themselves, they don't negotiate very well, and they're not standing in their expertise. They wait until they're 110% beyond what they can do, and then they'll say, well, I can sort of do that. And it's that I want to bring that fierceness, that willingness to really stand up and speak up for yourself. That's the inner dominatrix. That's part of the inner dominatrix energy.
Well, and I do have to say, before getting on to the business side of this, is In my early days in San Francisco, there was one year when I was not working during the gay parade. So I was actually able to go to the gay parade, and I volunteered to help out. And they, and I said, I'll help at one of the stages because I've been doing that for years and that's my expertise. And I wound up working backstage at the everything else stage, where all the people who didn't fit any other category, including the leather scene and the people who were doing S&M demonstrate, it wasn't really sex. It was just like international Mr. Leather and international Ms. Leather and whatever. And it wasn't like Hollywood at all. It wasn't at all what I had expected. It wasn't nearly as glamorous as Hollywood. It was interesting.
No. Hollywood makes it so glamorous, right?
Yes,
yeah. It never looks like that.
Well, let's go back to negotiating, because I really wanted to ask you, negotiating, whether it's to be the person who asks to go out and be the speaker, or negotiating for a raise. I mean, negotiating around money tends to be a very scary thing. It is a sales conversation. That's a lot of what I talk about with my clients. How can you be badass expert and not get the pushback of being considered too bossy, too aggressive, too much?
I love those questions. And the thing that comes up with people with negotiating, they usually do one of two things. Either one, they're pushing too hard because they're desperate for the sale, or two, they're too apologetic because they're afraid of asking for the sale. Mm-hmm. And either way creates a pushback from the other person. So the first thing that we really need to get into is the mindset of being detached from the outcome. And we know this from sales, right? Like, we know we've got to detach from the outcome. But if we really genuinely come in and we're in that playful, creative energy, and we come in and we're having the conversation and say that, I'm negotiating with you, Elizabeth, tell me what's going on. Like, tell me what you need to make your convention really great. Let me see if there's a way I can help you. So if I come in and I'm just like super curious and I'm listening, and this is the thing with sales, we listen a lot about what's going on. So the piece about going in and being able to be detached, I'll give everybody a little tip here. You've probably heard this before, but I'm going to reinforce it. Our brains are kind of like a PC computer, in which the more windows you have open, which is AKA emotions, so the more emotions that are running, the less cognitive and creative abilities you have. So if you want to go in detached, we've got to wrangle those monkey mind emotions so that we really ramp up the creative ability. Because then we go in and we can kind of pretend that we're negotiating for somebody else. I can go in as if I'm negotiating for you and say, okay, what do you got? What can we do? Oh, you don't have any money. Okay, well, what else do you have? Where else can we find something equivalent? What's going to work? How do we make this win-win, right? You're constantly being able to look for something. But if I just say, do those strategies, if you have all of the emotional baggage going on, what's going to happen is you're going to come in and go, well, what else can we do?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. and God damn it, that kid got promoted ahead of me, and I've been here for 10 years longer than he did. And yeah. So when and this is the thing for me, I may be a little biased because I've been doing inner work for, almost 30 years now, with clients. And for me, I think it starts there. If we don't have the inner capacity to show up, then we don't use all those great tools. So we can talk about the actual strategies of, say, when you're negotiating, you're going to ask for, what else is possible. You're going to say, do you have a newsletter? Do you have a magazine we can talk about all those things. But if you're not open in the first place, then it's not going to land. Yeah. I often think of it as voices in your head. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a voice. I have a choir A lot of them sound like my mother, but it's like a whole choir of my mother telling me all the things I'm doing wrong.
That's awesome.
Yeah, right. I mean, I loved my mother, but yeah, she had very high standards. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
If you've got this whole choir shouting in your head, you can't really listen if you're tuned into what the inner voices are saying, right?
Exactly. It's kind of like being at a really noisy bar and your friend's trying to talk to you. You're straining to hear them over all the other noise. And so we have to be able to contain the voices. I call it the monkey mind just because I like that image. Going from my background, I put a ball gag on the monkey mind and get it to be quiet. But we do have to wrangle that in so that we can show up, like I said, first and foremost, detached from the outcome. That is the most important piece in here.
Committed, but not attached.
Yes. And coming in and being that playful, creative 5-year-old. Right? We've all come across the 5-year-olds. They're the ones that are like, well, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Why does that work like that? Why does it work like that? They don't know what the answers are, but they're curious, and so they keep asking questions. And so that's a really big key. Do not try to negotiate anything until you feel like you've gotten all the specifics out of them that you possibly can.
Yeah.
Who's coming? How many are there? What's the setup? What's the agenda? What do you need? What would make a great conference for you if it's a conference, or
negotiating for a raise, or
Yeah,
I spent a lot of time with women who are helping women who are hitting glass ceilings. So, getting them to show up, being taken for granted, and so hitting glass ceilings.
Well, and that again really speaks to this piece of it's how we show up. When we go in and we have that expectation ahead of time that we're hitting a glass ceiling, then we're going to hit a glass ceiling. But when we go in and we say, hey, listen, it kind of feels like I'm hitting a glass ceiling. Is that just my imagination, or is that what's really going on here? You can start moving that needle a little bit and, start asking some questions of like, so what would be possible? What else would be possible? When they make an offer, the most powerful question I have for negotiating for anybody, like, use this everywhere. What else is possible? And you say that without any attachment, without any expectation. You're just like totally curious. Well, I wonder what else is possible. You try this. I've used this like hotels, and I'm like, oh, well, what else is possible? We're talking about things. They give me upgrades and they'll throw in extras, because if you just throw it out there and you don't answer it, it leaves a void. And then the other person feels drawn to fill the void.
I love that.
It's very powerful, but most people are not willing to be detached from the outcome. They go in, they're like, they're going to give me an upgrade. And then they go marching on up there and like, I'm going to be all badass and I'm going to get my upgrade, right? And then the person's like, no. So,
okay. Yeah. And it is easier said than done. Do you have any hints for how to deal with the old programming, if the old programming resurfaces and you hear yourself in the middle of it and you're going, and that makes you even more distracted? I don't know if that happens to you. That happens to me. And it's like, I hear myself doing the old patterns and I'm thinking, so like there's the chatter, the choir's going again. Yes.
Yeah. So the deeper work that I do with people goes through, the full process where we get in, remove the old programs, look at, replenishing where we have, what we would have gotten had we not put those programs in. And this gets a little bit woo, but then we also look at kind of like reparenting or reprogramming, putting in what we do want. So that whole system, there's like these really cool tools that I have for moving that needle. But I would say the very first thing to start out with, and I love giving this to people as a really simple tool. If I have time, give you a tool. So what we do, you're going to use your breath to release the emotion, the attachment to things. Breath is very powerful. And we can say statements because when we say statements, it brings up the emotion. All right. So, and we're going to use the statements on both the so-called positive and the negative, or having and not having. Okay. So if we think of it in terms of money, money is a great example for this. So we have stuff about having money, and we also have stuff being judgments and emotions and whatnot on not having it and what it means if we don't have it. So if you said a simple statement like, it's safe for me to have money, and then you take a deep breath and you release whatever that statement being said brought up, and then you say it again, and you release it, and you say it again, and you keep saying the statement and releasing it with the breath until the statement feels neutral. So neutral is how it feels when you say the statement, the sky is blue. Most of us are neutral on that statement. And then you also work on the not. So I am safe to not have money. Now it's not, I am not safe to have money. I know everybody wants to go there, but that's a different statement. So I am safe to not have money. And then what you've done effectively is you have eliminated both sides of the equation. And what we're left with is this beautiful space of choice in the middle. Ooh. And it becomes a choice to have it or not have it, do it or not do it. So that is a really, really simple tool. If people want to reach out to me, I have a booklet that, will walk you through it, and you can start digging into that first layer of the process. But that is a really good way to start, pitching out those, the monkey mind or the itty bitty shitty committee that people, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. But, to really start tackling that on your own. And then the bigger pieces where it's really locked in and you can't even say the statement, that's when you give me a call, because those are the pieces where you need that container, right? Just like going into the dungeon for people, a space for people to relax and be guided.
It's like that old saying, you can't see the label if you're inside the bottle.
Right.
No, this is where outside eyes and, and an objective observer can help. That's really, so you are, so that the thing about negotiating, again, is like women, what is it, do you think, that makes women so afraid to fail? I mean, I always thought that I wasted years personally waiting to be recognized for the good jobs I was doing and being pissed off and resentful about the guys who walked in and just said, oh yeah, I can do this. And they weren't nearly as qualified as I was, but I never knew what to do about it for a long time.
Yeah. And I think there's a multi-layer a thing to this. My tongue just stopped working. So we have our social conditioning that is going on, in which we have been conditioned to think of the whole, be collaborative, create community.
Women
is yes, in general. And, for millennia, this has been our role. And so we haven't been the hunters. Men have been the hunters, and they just go out and kill their thing. As opposed to women, we're like, let's all go together, and we all gather our baskets and go out together and go picking berries. So there's that conditioning. There's also the fact that realistically, women have only been climbing the corporate ladder for less than 100 years, really since 1960, maybe 1970 if we want it. That's only where women started to really start going up. So it's a very short period of time. And then women didn't have the mentors moving up. So the first women coming up, they clawed their way to the top, and they were not reaching down below and helping the women below them. So, you didn't benefit from having a mentor above you. Even if there were women above you, they weren't helping. And this is the dynamic that really starts to need to change, is that women, you and I at our level, we need to now turn and help the women below us, because that's what's going to change the system overall. Is that if we start mentoring them and letting them know, lean in early, lean in, you got this, I got you, you can do this, ask for it, quell those thoughts of what's going on in your brain.
Yeah, it gets to our old friend trust. And, sometimes I go, oh yeah, trust, the T word. Trust that there will be enough, trust that it will be safe, that there's room for more than one woman. If you get up there, will you do that? And I tend to be, I tend to be a very collaborative person, and what can I do to help and who would do this? And it is always a surprise when another woman sabotages me. This happened not too long ago where I was introducing myself to a group that I'd met, where I said, hey, I think I would be a good person on your team. And another speaker trainer responded and by accident copied me in. I think she hit reply all by mistake. And she said, no, Elizabeth would be terrible at this. I was so surprised that, so unexpected. It was, after I got over jumping up and down and gnashing my teeth, I was able to have a nice little, yeah, you haven't seen my work in several years. I do actually do this, that kind of thing. But I've often thought that the women who clawed their way up, it's the scarcity mentality that keeps them from saying it's going to be okay if I let somebody else in, or if I leave the door open for someone else. That doesn't hurt me to help somebody else.
Yeah, and I think, again, everything's always multi-layered. We have a situation where, initially there was only one seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
If a boardroom was open to having women, they would let one woman in.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't going to let more than one woman in. They're like, all right, we'll let the token woman back into the room, so that look, we have women in our boardroom. It was that kind of thing. And so there is a legitimate scarcity. However, changing that paradigm so that we are willing to lean in and feel that abundance. And that, again, that comes from our own inner work. If
Mm-hmm.
we feel confident in who we are and what we do, we're not going to feel threatened by other people. Mm-hmm. There's no need to put down another woman if we know who we are and what our value is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the call for me, is to invite women to come and stand in their own inner dominatrix, that power. And then from there, when you've claimed who you are, it's real easy to turn and say, here, let me help you up.
It occurs to me that being a dominatrix is a service, is giving a service, right?
It's very much a high level service position. Absolutely.
So if you think of that as you're claiming your inner dominatrix, you could also claim it as a way of doing service.
Yes.
It makes it easier to, I think about the people who are sort of flinching backwards and saying, do I really have to wear a leather corset?
No, because they're not that comfortable.
Yeah, no, it's like they don't have to do that. So what's exciting for you these days? What's interesting? We're all working from home mostly nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we're working close in, how is your business evolving?
I'm really excited. So just prior to COVID, I was starting to move into opening up small retreats, and I call them the deep surrender retreats. And so it's a weekend where we can really, come together, feel that supportive container, work on ourselves, but also understand, getting in touch with that surrender, that trust that we've been talking about. And these are just small, maximum of 12 people. So I've been waiting patiently for everything to open. So it's all opened up. We have our first one going in July. I am super excited.
Ooh, cool. Yay. Yeah. Yay. Hooray.
Yeah. So I really see those being a real call for people, because we are craving now. We're craving the connection. Nobody wants anything big. but we want something real, something with substance, something that's actually going to move the needle in a real way. So I'm very, very excited for these retreats.
Oh, wow. That sounds like great fun.
Mhm.
Dana Pharant, this has been such a delight to have you on here. I'm sure there are a million more things that we could talk about. Do you have one thing to leave us with?
My favorite quote is mine. Is
Okay.
when you're willing to lose everything, you can have anything.
Ooh, say that one again, please.
Yeah. When you're willing to lose everything, you can have anything.
Wow. That's a nice, profound one, scary one. And yeah, it's like I heard that the choir was going, no. So that's a great one. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dana Pharant. Thank you for coming on Speakers Who Get Results. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I want to remind you to go take our quiz. It is a 4-minute assessment of your presentation skills, where you're rocking them and where you might need a little support. You find that at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. Dana Pharant, thank you so much for having been a guest.
Oh, thank you. This has been a delight, Elizabeth.
Oh, it's been great fun. This has been Elizabeth Bachman, Speakers Who Get Results. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.